going down, and probably we're going to have to find that root right there and cut that to get the tree out. But the rest of this is all really fine hair roots. So what I'm going to do is just take the saw here, and I'll start over on this side and just kind of work my way around the tree. And see, this is not even, it's just a few inches deep. And rather than have the saw tear it up, anytime I hit a root of any size, I get out the nippers to free it up a little bit. Here's a bigger root right here. With the species I collect, and this is just basically in the mountains. I mean, you know, people that collect down in Louisiana and stuff that get different trees do it completely differently. But in the mountains, the trees that you want to collect basically are captives in rock formations. And that's what makes them collectible, actually. A lot of times you see those trees in a rock and you wiggle them and it's like they're cemented in. You think, well, how could you collect that? And that's true, you can't. But it's that one tree out of 100 or one out of 1,000 that's in almost like a natural bonsai pot. And those are the ones that you can take out and have a very high transplant success rate. Of course, what I want to look for is there's going to be places, look at that, how loose the tree is already. But there's going to be places where the roots go into crevices in the rock and hold that tree in. And those are the places I need to find before I can really lift it, because obviously if you start really pulling on the tree and it's still connected, you can do an awful lot of damage to the root system you've worked so hard to gather. You know, those real fine like steel wool type roots on the tree that are around the base of the tree like that, those are the ones that actually absorb the nutrients in the water that keep the tree alive. And so that's what you really want to collect. And hopefully, if you know, the ideal situation is to get a tree that has a good radial root system of larger roots supporting a really dense network of these really fine roots. And then you know, you separate the tree from the rock by cutting some of these anchor roots that are holding it in there. And when you lift the thing out, it's just solid. It's just a good solid root mat. I mean, you could carry it home without even wrapping it up. And that's, if you get that, that's perfect. You know, less ideal, a situation we see sometimes is where you'll have a tree that'll have one big solid root that might be the diameter of your wrist maybe, and then off of that root it'll have a jillion of these really fine hair roots. And what I found is that in that situation it's very fragile. It's real easy for all those hair roots to tear away from that one big root because it doesn't have a supporting network. So, you know, what you look for, hopefully, what you really want to find is a tree with a, you know, it's a root system. It's not just roots, it's a whole system of roots that all work together. I might want to mention one other thing here. It's very dry right now. Haven't had any rain in quite a while. But the root system, although it is dry, it's really not powder dry. It's got a fair amount of moisture inside there, which helps a great deal in keeping the thing together. When the roots get so dry they're powdery, it's a very, very bad time to collect. This is about as dry as you want them to get. If they get much drier than this, it's better to just wait, come back after it rains. So now I'm moving the tree here. Now I got some really loose stuff over here, and if I leave that on, I'm just going to cut that off, because if I leave that on, it's probably just going to flop down and it might rip off a lot more of the root system than I want. So probably I think I'll just prune this kind of right across there so that that floppy piece doesn't end up damaging some of the nice roots that we have got here. Probably with ponderosa pine, you know, on your rock outcrop environments, you might average 200 trees an acre, maybe. And I figure with ponderosa pine, I probably am able to collect about one tree out of 100. But it's not like 2 trees per acre. A lot of times it may be less than 1 tree out of 100 actually, because you may look over, you know, several acres and not find a single tree, and then you may find, you know, 3 or 4 within maybe a half acre area. You know, with junipers, it's much less. 1 out of 1,000, I would say. I mean, you look, so we've looked over sometimes 200 acres of rock and spent the whole day and not found a single collectible tree. And it's not that there's not trees there. There's lots and lots of these old twisted up trees, but it's finding one that has a root system that will allow it to come out of the rock and safely transplant. That's the rare thing. I mean, these old trees are to some extent unusual, but in the right environment, that's the normal growth pattern. So they're not really, I mean, there's whole mountainsides of these twisted up trees. What's unusual is to find one that's got the surface roots and a situation where you can get it out of there. So
I notice in this corner when I'm working here that there's still something holding it in there. Probably the biggest mistake you could make with a tree like this is to try and lift it out of there before you're absolutely certain that you've freed it all up. One root hung up in a rock could ruin the whole works for you. So you gotta, I think I can feel something right down in there that might be what's keeping it in there. I don't know if I can get these pruners in there or not. All right, now I cut that root there, and as you can see now, that has considerably freed up the tree, although we're still connected down here. And so I can start pulling the tree out. I can feel there's something right there, so I need to work on this area.
The ends of the roots, when they're growing, they swell up, and then they're a much lighter color. Like junipers are kind of a pinkish color when they're growing. Pines are white, spruce are really white, but they look much different. I mean, they look almost like a miniature spaghetti noodle in a sense on the end. Usually the last 1 to 2 inches, that's where it's growing.
Now it seems like everything is freed up, but this is really a good time not to make a mistake and just try and lift the tree. We want to kind of very gently lift up on it. It's cracking right there. There could be some big rocks in here that could rip the whole root system apart if we just pulled it out of there. So at this point, this is a point when you tend to get impatient and want to just lift your tree up. And actually, this is when you really have to be careful and see what you've actually got here before you. And I think we've got what we want. Let's try leaning it back the other way and see if this is free. There's something holding it here. Okay, I think at this point, tree actually is free. Sure enough. Now I'm going to lift this up and put it on the rock over here, and I want to look at the bottom of the root pad for a minute, if I can lift this. It's always a little bigger than we think. But can you focus on these roots? Mm-hmm. If you'll notice, it's very, as I said, very dry right now. But if you look, these are new roots. These are all growing. Now that's a really good sign. That tells me that what we have here is a functional, active root system. Not just a root. I mean, this is an integrated root system that works together to feed these trees, keep this tree alive. And the fact that it's active right now, that the roots in fact are growing, lets me know that when I put it in a pot, they'll probably continue to try to grow, and our transplant success with something like this would be very, very high. You know, the upper 90%. You hardly lose a tree like this unless you do something wrong. It also tells me that when you're bringing ponderosa pine into a wetter environment, I believe these trees that have evolved in a kind of a high, dry mountain environment need a lot of oxygen in their root systems. And if you put them in a soil mix that's too heavy, you basically will smother the tree. They like a lot of water actually, but they like to be able to breathe. And they need to breathe. As you can see, it's very, very dry here, and the roots are doing fine, they're growing. So now I'm going to just wrap this up in burlap and see if I can talk somebody into carrying this down the mountain for me. One last thing I wanted to say here. After removing the tree, the right thing to do is to rake all this duff and stuff back into the hole or back into the depression in the rock. Ponderosa pine are very vigorous cedars, and in the not too distant future, I would expect to see another plant growing here, and in another 100 years or so, we'll have another bonsai probably. But I kind of want to maintain that environment. I don't want to just leave a bare, eroded hole there. So I always try and rake all the duff and stuff back into the cavity.